All right, jumping right into it today. We've got breaking news. Yeah, a significant earthquake just hit off the coast of California, and there's a tsunami warning in effect as we speak. So this is going to be a kind of unique deep dive for us experiencing this in real time, just like everyone listening. To help us understand what's happening, we've got an expert joining us. Thanks for being here, especially on such short notice.
Of course, it's critical to break this down as it develops, definitely. And my thoughts are with everyone in the affected area, of course.
The reports are coming in fast, but some of the key details we have are a 7.0 magnitude earthquake.
Wow.
At a depth of 10 kilometers, striking about 100 kilometers southwest of Ferndale, California. Now, I'm no seismologist, so can you put those numbers into perspective? Like, what does a 7.0 at that depth actually mean? What kind of damage are we potentially looking at?
Well, a 7.0 magnitude at this depth, that has the potential to cause really serious damage. It's actually kind of bringing back memories of the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake that hit the Bay Area.
Oh, wow.
We could be looking at a similar scenario in terms of impact.
And with the depth, what specifically makes that more dangerous?
Well, think of it this way. The energy released by the earthquake has less distance to travel before it reaches the surface.
Okay.
So that means the shaking is going to be much more intense in the areas closest to the epicenter. It's like, imagine a punch landing directly versus one that kind of glances off.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and then on top of that, we've got this tsunami warning. Now, I know they're giant waves caused by earthquakes, but can you explain how that actually works? How does an earthquake actually trigger a tsunami?
Sure. So it all comes down to displacement.
Okay.
When the earthquake happens, it doesn't just shake the ground. It actually disrupts the seafloor.
Right. Yeah.
This sudden shift can push a colossal amount of water upwards. Like, if you push your hand through a bathtub, you see the water level rise and ripple outward.
I see, yeah.
In the ocean, this displacement creates a massive bulge on the surface. And that bulge becomes a wave that travels outwards from the epicenter.
So these aren't just, little ripples. The reports mention 5.3 million people are under this warning, and I'm seeing live footage of evacuations. It's a serious situation developing. Can you explain why heeding those evacuation orders is so important?
Well, imagine trying to outrun a wall of water moving at the speed of a jet plane.
Whoa.
That's essentially what we're dealing with here. The problem is that even a relatively small tsunami can inundate coastal areas and cause catastrophic damage. People often think of tsunamis as like a single giant wave.
Right.
But in reality, it's a series of waves. And sometimes those later waves are even larger than the first.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, waiting it out is never a good option.
Yeah, the sheer speed and force are terrifying. The report also mentions that the earthquake was felt as far away as San Francisco, over 1.3 million people potentially feeling the tremors. What determines how far those tremors are felt? Is there a way to predict how strong they'll be at a certain distance?
Well, it's not just about distance. Factors like the type of rock and soil that the waves travel through also play a role. Kind of like how sound travels differently through air than through water.
Okay, yeah.
Building codes also have a huge impact on how structures respond to the shaking. Older buildings, especially those not retrofitted for seismic activity, they're much more vulnerable.
So it's this mix of distance, geology, and human factors that all kind of come together. This all feels really serious, especially with the news that the governor of California is meeting with emergency officials as we speak. I imagine the challenges for first responders are immense.
Absolutely. First and foremost, they need to locate and rescue anyone who might be trapped in collapsed buildings or injured amidst the chaos. And then, you have the challenge of restoring essential services like power and water, often while dealing with damaged infrastructure.
So it's a multi-pronged crisis unfolding here. And while we've got a grasp on the immediate situation, what about the aftermath? What does long-term recovery look like in a scenario like this?
It's a long road ahead. And I think a critical question to consider is, what can individuals and communities do to prepare for these types of events?
That's what we'll explore next, right? Because while the science behind earthquakes and tsunamis is fascinating, the real takeaway here is how we can build resilience.
Precisely. So let's dive into that aspect now. What can you as a listener do to prepare? What should you have in place? And how can we as a community come together to mitigate these risks?
Let's unpack that. Okay, so we've kind of laid out the science of what's happening, and it's a lot to process,
Mhm.
but you're right. The more practical question is what can we actually do with this information? It almost feels empowering, I think, to shift the focus to preparedness, especially when things feel so out of control.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the first step is understanding your risk.
Yeah.
Like, do you live in an earthquake-prone area? Are you close to the coast, potentially vulnerable to tsunamis? Once you know your risk, you can start building your plan.
So where do we even begin? What are some concrete steps that people can take to be better prepared?
Well, having an emergency kit is absolutely non-negotiable.
Okay.
Think water, non-perishable food, a first aid kit, flashlights, batteries. The essentials you'd need to be self-sufficient for at least 72 hours. And don't forget things like medications, copies of important documents, little cash.
It's easy to overlook those things when you're kind of panicking. I remember during a minor earthquake a few years ago, the first thing I did was grab my phone, but it was useless with no signal.
Exactly. And that brings up another crucial point, communication. Have a plan for how you'll contact family members if phone lines are down. A designated out-of-state contact can be a lifesaver.
And what about evacuation routes? I know those are crucial for a tsunami, but do they matter for earthquakes too?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Knowing where to go if your home is unsafe,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a designated shelter or even a safe spot in your neighborhood, that can be crucial in any disaster scenario.
Okay, so we've got the kit, the communication plan, the evacuation routes. What other aspects of preparedness should we be thinking about?
Don't underestimate the power of community. Talk to your neighbors, get involved in local preparedness efforts. There's strength in numbers, and that's especially true in disaster situations.
You mentioned building codes earlier. What role do they play in making communities more resilient to earthquakes?
Building codes they're critical, and they evolve as we learn from each event. After the Northridge earthquake in 1994, for example, California made significant changes to its building codes, and those changes undoubtedly saved lives in subsequent earthquakes.
So it's an ongoing process of learning and uplifting. This raises another question for me. Are there early warning systems for tsunamis like there are for earthquakes? Can technology give us a little more time to react?
Yes, there are sophisticated buoy systems and coastal monitoring stations that detect changes in sea level and can issue alerts.
All right.
But even with these systems, time is always of the essence. Tsunami waves can travel across entire oceans in a matter of hours, so every minute counts.
Yeah, that's a stark reminder of the immense power we're dealing with here. As we're talking about preparedness, I keep thinking about the psychological impact of these events. The fear, the anxiety, the feeling of being completely overwhelmed. How do we prepare for that aspect of a disaster?
It's such an important point, and often overlooked. Having a support system in place, whether it's family, friends, or a therapist, that can be crucial for coping with the emotional toll of a disaster.
So it's about mental and emotional preparedness just as much as it's about, the physical preparedness.
Exactly. And recognizing that it's okay to ask for help, to lean on others, to acknowledge the trauma that these events can inflict.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been incredibly insightful, and it does feel empowering to focus on what we can control. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to the earthquake itself. You mentioned that the magnitude scale is logarithmic, and I have to admit, that always kind of throws me off a bit. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Essentially, each whole number increase on the magnitude scale represents a tenfold increase in the amplitude of the seismic waves, the shaking, and about 32 times more energy released.
So a magnitude 7.0 earthquake is not just slightly stronger than a 6.0, it's exponentially more powerful.
That's right. And to give you a sense of scale, the energy released by a magnitude 7.0 earthquake is roughly equivalent to the detonation of a small nuclear weapon. It's a truly staggering amount of energy.
Wow, yeah, that puts things into perspective. So we've covered the science, the impact, the importance of preparedness, and the emotional toll of these events.
And I think we've highlighted that while we can't control nature's fury, we can control our own actions and how we prepare for the inevitable.
Yeah, it's about taking ownership of our own safety and well-being and recognizing that we're all in this together.
Exactly. It's about having those difficult conversations with our families, checking in on our neighbors, and supporting initiatives that strengthen our community's ability to withstand these challenges.
And it's about recognizing the power of knowledge. The more we understand about these natural forces, the better equipped we are to navigate them. This has been an eye-opening conversation, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to take action.
As do I. Remember, Knowledge is power, and preparedness is key. Stay safe, stay informed, and take care of each other.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, stay curious, stay engaged. We'll continue to explore these topics and bring you the insights you need to navigate our ever-changing world. So we were talking about the impact of these underwater earthquakes on marine life. It's like a whole other dimension to this event that I hadn't even really considered.
Yeah, it's a crucial aspect
Mm.
and one that often gets overlooked in the immediate aftermath. I mean, the underwater environment is just as vulnerable to these forces as the land is, if not more so.
Yeah. I imagine the impact can be pretty devastating. What kinds of effects are we talking about here?
Well, the initial shock wave from the earthquake can cause significant damage to marine habitats,
Mm.
particularly those close to the epicenter. Coral reefs, for example.
Oh, right.
They can be shattered or dislodged, and fish populations, they could be disoriented or even killed by the intense pressure changes.
Wow. And then the tsunami kind of adds another layer of disruption on top of that.
Exactly. The sheer force of the tsunami can, uproot kelp forests. It can displace marine mammals, even alter ocean currents. It's like a giant underwater bulldozer, reshaping the landscape.
Are there any specific examples of how marine life has been impacted by past earthquakes and tsunamis?
Yeah, so after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan, researchers observed a dramatic decline in certain fish populations,
Mm.
likely due to habitat loss and changes in food availability. They also found evidence of marine debris, including plastic and fishing gear, being transported thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean by the tsunami currents.
Wow. So it's not just the immediate impact, but also these long-term consequences on the delicate balance of the ocean ecosystem.
Precisely. And these events can have cascading effects. They ripple through the food chain and they can alter the entire ecosystem for years to come.
It's a sobering thought, and it really underscores the interconnectedness of everything on our planet. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the science of earthquakes and tsunamis to the importance of preparedness and this often unseen impact on marine life. What would you say is the most crucial takeaway for our listeners?
I think for me, it's about embracing the concept of resilience,
Hmm.
both on a personal and a community level. We live on a dynamic planet,
Yeah.
and these events are a part of that dynamism. While we can't control when or where they occur, we can control how we respond and how we prepare.
Yeah. It's about taking ownership of our own safety and well-being and recognizing that we're all in this together.
Exactly. It's about having those difficult conversations with our families,
Yeah.
checking in on our neighbors, and supporting initiatives that strengthen our community's ability to withstand these challenges.
And it's about recognizing the power of knowledge. The more we understand about these natural forces, the better equipped we are to navigate them. This has been an eye-opening conversation, and I really hope our listeners feel empowered to take action.
As do I. Remember, knowledge is power and preparedness is key.
Mhm.
Stay safe, stay informed,
Yeah.
and take care of each other.
Well said. And to our listeners, stay curious, stay engaged. We'll continue to explore these topics and bring you the insights you need to navigate our ever-changing world.